Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The main hall of the Crystal Mall shone under the suspended lights, reflecting the glittering windows of the luxury boutiques. Fragrances mingled in the air, and the murmur of conversation echoed off the polished marble. Elegant shoppers strolled, designer bags in hand, while employees busied themselves making the place look impeccable. It was into this refined setting that a black woman entered. She wore a simple but chic coat, her hair neatly tied back, and her eyes shone with a serene glow. She walked confidently but without ostentation, as if she knew every corner of the place. A few meters away, a security guard noticed her arrival. Tall, imposing, impeccably uniformed, Paul followed her suspiciously. For him, this woman didn't belong here. His thoughts hardened, another one who comes to hang around, probably for no good reason. He clenched his jaw, stepped forward, and strategically positioned himself to intercept her. The customers continued their purchases, unaware that anything unexpected was about to happen. What Paul was completely unaware of was that this woman was no ordinary customer. She was neither an intruder, nor a stranger to this luxurious world. She was the real owner of this shopping center. And soon, his mistake would cost him more than he could ever imagine. The morning dawned clear and mild. The sun's rays reflected off the glass facade of the Crystal Mall, one of the city's most renowned shopping complexes. In front of the main entrance, luxury cars lined up, dropping off customers eager to begin their shopping spree. Among the crowd passing through the automatic doors, one woman walked calmly and confidently. Grace Johnson, 42, exuded understated elegance. She wore a perfectly tailored beige coat, a simple but refined black leather bag, and a pair of thin glasses that gave her an air of both seriousness and distinction. Nothing in her appearance betrayed the immense wealth she possessed. She had come that day without an escort, without an assistant, without attracting attention. It was a habit she loved, blending in with the crowd to observe the management of her shopping center up close. She wanted to feel the atmosphere, see the details that the cameras and reports never revealed. As she walked through the lobby, her gaze slid over the polished marble, the shops lined up like jewels, and the employees smilingly greeting the first customers. Everything seemed in order. Yet Grace knew that one must always look beyond appearances. She stopped in front of a jewelry store window, not for the jewelry, but to observe the salespeople's behavior toward customers. She had learned, over the years, that respect and hospitality were worth more than the brilliance of precious stones. It was then that she felt an insistent gaze fixed on her. A discreet shiver ran down her spine. She turned slightly and saw, a few meters away, a security guard staring at her suspiciously. The tall, broad-shouldered man stood as stiff as a wall, his cold eyes following her every move. Grace gave a small, polite smile, then looked away, resuming her leisurely walk. She had no idea yet that this man, driven by prejudices he believed invisible, would turn this simple visit into a humiliating ordeal. Step by step, she moved towards what would become one of the most significant turning points in her journey as a woman and a homeowner. Paul Dupuis, chief security guard at the Crystal Mall, stood erect near the large central fountain. His perfectly pressed midnight blue uniform, gleaming badge, and military posture gave him the air of a man who took his job very seriously. But behind this professional facade, he concealed certainties and judgments he believed to be legitimate. When he first saw Grace walk through the doors, he immediately felt an unease he couldn't explain. She walked confidently, surveying the area carefully, a behavior that, according to him, betrayed something fishy. Look, another one coming to snoop, he thought, clenching his jaw. They can't afford to come and buy here, but they still want to put on airs. He followed Grace with his eyes, noting her every move. The fact that she lingered in front of the windows without buying anything aroused an automatic suspicion in him. It was clear to him, this woman was not a regular customer. He convinced himself that she had no business being here, especially not in such a luxurious center. Paul had worked for years in private security. He believed he knew who belonged in this world and who didn't. And in his warped mind, Grace couldn't be anything other than an outsider in this setting. On several occasions he discreetly consulted his colleagues by radio. "Watch out for the woman in the beige coat and black bag. I find her suspicious." On the other end of the line, a colleague answered hesitantly. "Are you sure? She looks like a normal customer, Paul." "No, no. I'm telling you, she's dragging her feet. I'll take care of her." His eyes filled with a hard, almost defiant glint. He adjusted his earpiece and sat up, ready to intervene. For him, this wasn't just about work. It was also a way to show his authority, to remind everyone that in this center, he was the one who decided who was allowed to stay. Grace, for her part, was still unaware of the approaching storm. She calmly watched a clothing store as Paul walked toward her, his heavy footsteps echoing on the marble, like a shadow lengthening behind her. Grace stopped in front of a high-end clothing store. She looked at the displays with a slight smile, mentally noting the presentation and the saleswomen's welcome. Her entrepreneurial eye always sought to improve the customer experience, never forgetting that every detail counted. But behind her, heavy footsteps were approaching. The sharp tone of a male voice suddenly broke the hushed atmosphere of the shopping center. "Excuse me, madam." Grace turned around calmly. The security guard was standing straight in front of her, his arms crossed, his gaze hard and suspicious. "Yes?" she replied politely. "I'm going to need to see some ID and know what you're doing here," he said, without even introducing himself. Grace frowned slightly in surprise. "An ID? Why?" Paul shrugged, his tone full of authority. "It's procedure. We don't allow people to loiter in the mall without a valid reason. Are you here to buy something?" Around them, a few customers began to slow down, intrigued by the scene. The shop assistants exchanged worried glances. Grace, still calm, tried to clarify. "Sir, I'm just walking around, like any other customer. I have nothing to hide." But Paul shook his head, convinced that he was right. "Exactly. I noticed that you're looking at the windows a lot, but you're not going into any stores. This behavior is suspicious. I'd like you to follow me, please." Grace held his gaze, a hint of coldness in her voice. "Are you accusing me of something?" The security guard gave a condescending smile. "Not yet, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. Here, we don't tolerate people who loiter without cause." A tense silence fell. Grace felt the gazes of passers-by weighing on her, a mixture of curiosity and unease. She took a deep breath, choosing dignity over anger. "I have nothing to prove," she said softly but firmly. "I came here legitimately." Paul, annoyed by his calmness, straightened up to his full height. "Then prove it. Show me your papers. Otherwise, I'll have to escort you out." Murmurs began to spread among the customers. Several already took out their phones to film the scene. Grace stood motionless, staring at him with quiet intensity. She knew that every second that passed brought this man closer to a mistake he would never forget. The atmosphere in the lobby of the Crystal Mall had grown heavy. A few customers had stopped, pretending to look at the windows while stealing glances at Grace and the security guard. Their curious, some incredulous, stares made the situation even more tense. Paul, swollen with his sense of authority, took another step toward Grace, closing the space between them. His voice hardened. "That's enough, madam. Show me your papers or get out." Grace stared at him calmly, her hands resting on her bag. She wasn't trembling, but the dull humiliation rising inside her burned in her chest. "You have no valid reason to speak to me like that," she replied calmly. "I'm neither a danger nor a suspect. I'm just walking." Paul clicked his tongue in annoyance. "It's always the same excuse. You're hanging around, looking everywhere as if you're scouting. You think I don't see it?" He suddenly reached out and grabbed Grace by the wrist, pulling her toward the exit. The gesture was sharp and brutal, immediately attracting attention. A saleswoman cried out timidly. "Sir, perhaps." But Paul ignored him, his face closed, determined to impose order. "Come on, get out," he said coldly. "This is no place for you." The words, clear and full of contempt, sounded like a slap in the face. Grace felt a mixture of anger and sadness rise within her, but she remained silent. She knew that any overreaction would only empower this man. Shocked customers took out their phones to film. A mother covered her child's ears in outrage. An old man whispered, "But, she's a respectable lady, look at her." Grace, despite the humiliation, kept her head high. She let Paul push her to the mall's automatic doors. She took a deep breath before stepping through the exit, feeling the cold outside hit her face. Behind her, the glass door closed in a heavy silence. Paul crossed his arms, satisfied with his victory. There, he thought arrogantly. One less intruder. But what he didn't know was that his action had just triggered a shock wave that would soon turn against him. Outside the Crystal Mall, Grace stood for a moment. The cold morning air brushed against her face, but that wasn't what made her shiver. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with suppressed anger. She had just been evicted from her own mall, in front of dozens of witnesses. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the turmoil inside. The security guard's words still echoed in her mind, "This is not a place for you." Never had a sentence hurt her so much, not because she doubted her place, but because this public humiliation recalled decades of injustice that so many people before her had suffered. On the other side of the glass, inside the lobby, the silence was almost palpable. The customers and employees, who had witnessed the scene, remained frozen in a mixture of unease and guilt. Some had lowered their eyes to avoid the gaze of others. Others exchanged discreet whispers. "Do you think she did something?" "No, she was just looking at the windows." What he did was too violent. Phones remained raised, videos were already circulating on social media. Notifications discreetly buzzed in pockets, but no one yet dared directly confront the security guard. Paul, meanwhile, returned to his position near the fountain, proud of his intervention. He convinced himself that he had accomplished his duty. That's what discipline is. If we start tolerating just anyone, this center will lose its reputation. But his triumph had a bitter taste in the public's eyes. Shop assistants whispered among themselves. Some were ashamed, others feared that the incident would reflect badly on the center's image. Outside, Grace finally raised her head. Her dignity remained intact, even in the midst of this humiliation. She knew that justice didn't require shouting or arguing at the moment. She knew her power, her truth, and above all, her identity. She calmly stepped off the sidewalk, leaving behind a silence fraught with unease, but also with foreboding. The calm before the storm. Because what no one imagined yet was that the woman expelled a few minutes earlier would soon return, not as a victim, but as the true mistress of the place. The next morning, an unusual atmosphere reigned at the Crystal Mall. Early on, urgent invitation emails had been sent to all the complex's managers, store managers, maintenance managers, administrative staff, and, of course, security. The summons came directly from the board of directors, with a simple and solemn message. Mandatory attendance. Subject: serious incident concerning the image and management of the shopping center. In the top-floor conference room, executives sat around a long mahogany table. The walls were lined with large bay windows overlooking the city. The atmosphere, usually studious, was tense this time. Whispers circulated. "Do you think this has anything to do with what happened yesterday?" "Yes, I've seen videos circulating on social media. It's going viral." "It was that security guard, wasn't it? The one who's always overzealous?" Paul finally entered the room, looking confident. He wore his impeccable uniform, his badge shining, and his gaze displayed a restrained pride. In his eyes, this meeting would be an opportunity to receive praise for his vigilance. He sat straight, crossing his arms in satisfaction. His colleagues avoided him with their gaze, but he interpreted this as jealousy. The administrative director stood up and spoke in a solemn voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered today to discuss an incident that has seriously tarnished the image of our institution. You have probably seen the videos circulating on social media. A screen lit up at the back of the room, showing a clip filmed by a customer, Paul grabbing Grace by the wrist and pushing her out of the center as passers-by looked on in astonishment. The murmurs grew louder. Paul, though slightly tense, maintained his facade of a smile. "You see," he said with a slight, forced laugh. "I did my job. I prevented a suspicious person from staying. I acted to protect the prestige of the center." But the director didn't answer. On the contrary, he gave a faint, strange smile, as if he had been waiting for this precise moment. The door to the room opened slowly. All eyes turned. An elegant figure entered, dressed in a dark suit and a crisp white shirt. His steps were calm, his posture impeccable. His face was one Paul wished he had never seen again. It was Grace Johnson. And this time, she didn't come as an anonymous customer. She came as the owner. As Grace stepped through the door of the meeting room, an immediate hush fell over the gathering. Her heels clicked softly against the floor, each step echoing like a declaration of power. Her gaze calmly swept the room, stopping briefly on Paul, whose face had just lost all color. She sat down at the head of the table, in the place of honor, where only the majority shareholders sat. Murmurs rippled through the room. Several executives finally understood what was happening. The administrative director immediately stood up to greet him. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to formally introduce Mrs. Grace Johnson, founder and owner of Crystal Mall." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Some employees widened their eyes, others exchanged ashamed glances. Paul, however, remained frozen, his mouth hanging open. His heart was pounding so loudly he felt everyone could hear it. Grace folded her hands on the table and spoke in a firm but calm voice. "Yesterday, I came here, to MY Shopping Center, as I sometimes do. I wanted to observe discreetly, to see how my customers and employees were being treated. But yesterday, I didn't just see. I experienced what too many people experience in silence." She paused. Her gaze fixed directly on Paul. "I was publicly humiliated. Accused without cause. Pushed out as if I had no value. Not because I had broken a rule, but because, in this man's eyes, I didn't belong there." The words echoed in the icy silence. The faces of the officials fell, unable to bear the mixture of dignity and pain. Grace straightened slightly, and her voice took on a sharper intensity. "Yesterday, I was the invisible owner. Today, I am the very real owner. And I want to make this clear, this shopping center is a place of welcome, openness, and respect. No one, I repeat, person, has no right to humiliate a customer, let alone judge them by the color of their skin." She put her hands down, her gaze cold. "Mr. Paul Dupuis, you have failed in what this establishment represents. You have evicted me from my own home." Paul tried to stammer. I didn't know, madam. I just thought I'd do my tra." "Your work," Grace cut in sharply. "Your job is not to humiliate. Your job is not to judge on appearances. Your job is to protect and serve with dignity. And yesterday, you demonstrated exactly the opposite." The room remained silent. Grace's quiet authority crushed every attempt at justification. Paul's eyes, filled with panic, searched for a way out, but there was none. Grace continued, with icy calm. "Today, I reveal who I am. And I assure you, this mistake will have consequences." She stood up, marking the end of her speech. The executives present, confused but admiring, knew they had just witnessed a decisive moment. Paul felt the ground opening up beneath his feet. The next morning, the hotel was buzzing with unusual excitement. A special event had been organized in the main lobby, a press conference and reception in honor of the owner. Journalists flocked, cameras were set up, and curious employees wondered who would finally appear. Some still whispered that it must be a wealthy foreign heiress, others spoke of a powerful businessman. No one imagined what was about to happen. The security guard at the entrance, dressed in his impeccable uniform, tried to appear relaxed, but his gaze searched for the slightest trace of authority. He absolutely didn't want to relive the embarrassment of the day before. He had no idea that his public humiliation was coming sooner than he thought. The glass doors opened. A familiar figure entered, dressed in an elegant white suit. It was Amara Johnson. The same black woman he had scorned and chased away the day before. But this time, she wasn't walking alone. 2 assistants followed her, carrying files, and behind them, the hotel manager, his expression grave, escorted her respectfully. Silence fell. All eyes focused on her. Reporters raised their cameras, flashes began to pop. Amara walked calmly to the lectern in the center of the hall. Her voice, calm but firm, echoed through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your presence. We are gathered here today to formalize something many are still unaware of. I am Amara Johnson, owner of this hotel." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The employees' eyes widened in shock, some lowered their heads in shame. The security guard felt his face drain of all color. His hands trembled slightly. He took a step back in disbelief, unable to tear his gaze away from Amara. She, without even looking at him, continued confidently. "Yesterday, some doubted my place here, simply because of my appearance. But today, I want to reiterate one thing: this hotel is founded on the values of excellence and respect. And I will never allow contempt or discrimination to cross its doors." The room erupted in applause. The cameras captured every moment. Amara smiled, dignified and strong. Meanwhile, the security guard realized he had just sealed his own fate. The Crystal Mall conference room was plunged into a heavy silence. Paul Dupuis, the security guard, stood there, his hands clenched on the edge of the table, his face ashen. Every word Grace spoke left a burning trace in his mind. He finally understood the magnitude of his grave mistake. Grace, sitting opposite him, spoke calmly again. "Mr. Dupuis, yesterday you failed in your mission. Not only did you humiliate someone, but that person was me, the owner." Paul opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. His colleagues avoided meeting his gaze, and some whispered quietly among themselves. "Incredible, he really didn't know. He's going to lose his job, that's for sure." Grace continued. "As a result, you are immediately suspended and dismissed. You will no longer perform any security duties in this shopping center. In addition, I will personally ensure that strict training on respect, diversity, and anti-discrimination is implemented for all staff." The words fell like a cleaver. Paul felt his world crumble. Everything he believed he had, his authority, his power, his superiority, had just dissipated in a few sentences. Grace stood up, majestic, and added, "I want everyone here to understand something: this shopping center is a place of welcome and respect. No one has the right to judge or treat anyone with contempt, regardless of their skin color." She turned to the entire team, her gaze piercing. "Starting today, we are making this establishment a national example. Every employee must remember that human dignity prevails over all prejudices and that no discriminatory acts will be tolerated." Paul, unable to say a word, bowed his head. His silence spoke volumes more than any justification. Applause from his colleagues echoed through the room, symbolizing the recognition of Grace's justice and moral authority. As she left the room, Grace left behind a clear lesson: dignity, respect, and truth always triumph in the end. The security guard, humiliated in turn, had learned the hard way that hatred and prejudice only lead to downfall. The weeks following the incident were marked by a quiet but profound transformation at Crystal Mall. Inspired by Grace Johnson's courage and dignity, employees gradually changed the way they worked and perceived customers. The atmosphere, once heavy and hierarchical, became warmer and more respectful. Grace, always present among her shops, took the time to talk with the staff, listening to their ideas and concerns. She encouraged everyone to act with integrity, to overcome prejudices and to treat each customer with equal consideration. Paul Dupuis, for his part, left the mall, humiliated but aware of his mistake. The experience forced him to reflect on his behavior and confront his own prejudices. He understood, much too late, that authority is not measured by control or fear, but by respect and humanity. For Grace, the incident wasn't just a personal victory. It was a symbol, even in a world where appearances and prejudice persist, truth, dignity, and justice eventually prevail. Her firmness had transformed a humiliation into a collective lesson, reminding everyone that true power lies not in intimidation, but in the quiet strength of knowing who they are and what they are worth. The Crystal Mall, now recognized not only for its luxury but also for its values of inclusion and respect, became a national example. Visitors felt welcomed and valued, and employees understood that a simple act of dignity could change lives, including their own. Grace, walking the aisles of the mall, observed the smiles of the customers and the renewed respect among her staff. She knew that each admiring glance reflected a silent but essential victory: dignity always triumphs. And so, the man who had believed he reigned through fear remained, but forever marked by the lesson of the one he had humiliated.